Cray was a regular loser who somehow ends up leading the greatest team of treasure hunters in the world, though what he really wanted was a quiet, peaceful life in the village where he was born. Becoming a treasure hunter even was the ridiculous dream of his childhood friends, who were obsessed with becoming famous heroes exploring ancient vaults packed with riches and dangerous monsters, and he was dragged into the midst of all that shit. The story kicks off with a group of kids full of dreams. One of them excitedly says they should become treasure hunters, imagining themselves venturing to treasure vaults around the world, claiming riches and glory. The others are fired up by the idea, agreeing that the 6 of them together could achieve their dream of becoming the strongest heroes in the world. Then the red-haired kid even mentions they should head to the capital Zabrudio one day. The scene then jumps to the present day, and we see a cloaked man walking the bustling streets, musing about the life of treasure hunters. He explains that treasure hunters are like the celebrities of the imperial capital. They travel to ancient ruins and treasure vaults scattered across the world, risking their lives to claim hidden treasures. For the danger of fighting terrifying monsters known as phantoms, they're rewarded with wealth and honor. Then as the man walks, a tavern comes into view. He notes that today inside this tavern, one of the most powerful clans called First Steps is holding interviews for new party members. He explains that a clan is essentially a gathering of parties, like a mutual aid society. There's only so much an explorer can do on their own. If you want to climb to higher levels, it's crucial to join a strong party and grow alongside your allies. Then, while standing in line to get into the tavern, the man admits to himself that he was never able to reach that point. Suddenly, a girl behind him strikes up a conversation, asking if he's here to form a party too. Apologizing for the sudden chat, she introduces herself as Runa Runebeck, an explorer certified at level 3. The guy responds, introducing himself as Cry Andre, but then when Ruda offers to shake his hand, he doesn't take it. She then seems surprised at the huge crowd gathered for the interviews and confides that she's been exploring solo until now, and she struggled with a treasure shrine called the White Wolf's Den, which led her to finally consider joining a party. Another explorer nearby overhears their conversation and scoffs, thinking Ruda is out of her depth for trying to tackle that treasure shrine at level 3, and he smugly tells her that a place like that isn't for amateurs like her. Ruda understandably doesn't appreciate being called an amateur by a total stranger, but the guy doubles down, explaining that First Steps is one of the top clans in the imperial capital. Sure, level 3 might be considered mid-level in the outside world, but here, it's basically beginner status. He advises her to turn around and go home, which only makes Ruda angrier, so she draws her knives. Before things can escalate, the guards conducting the interviews step in. They warn them to calm down, saying they'll be forced to kick them out if they cause a scene. The guard scolds them, reminding them that an explorer should never draw their weapons in the streets. With that, the tension settles, and the next scene shifts to Cry and Ruda inside the tavern. Ruda is taken aback by the sheer number of applicants and admits she's never been in a place like this before, so she curiously asks Cray if he's been through something like this before, and he casually replies that this is his 5th time. Ruda then surprisingly feels a little bad for him, but Cray brushes it off, telling her there's no need for sympathy. He then explains that being an explorer is all about skill. Talented people rise to the top quickly, but for those who aren't as gifted, it's a much tougher road. Ruda then points out a flashy party in the tavern, asking Cry about them. Cry informs her that they're the Holy Spirit's son called Ark Brave, currently looking for new members. They're the ones who recently conquered a level 7 treasure vault, and they're considered one of the best parties around. Their leader Ark Rodin is known for recognizing talent, and if he recognizes an explorer, that person's success is practically guaranteed, but Cray admits this is the first time he's seen them conducting interviews. Ruda then notices an empty seat and asks about it, but before Cry can answer, the rude guy from earlier butts in again, arrogantly declaring that Ruda is clueless. He says he'll enlighten her whether she wants it or not. Despite her telling him to stop, he introduces himself as Greg Zangief, a level 4 certified explorer. He points out that the empty seat belongs to the founder of the Grievers, one of the most respected parties in the capital. Cry then explains that the Grievers came to the capital a few years ago as a fresh new party, and they quickly rose to prominence due to their immense talent. Their official name is Grieving Souls, and as Cry reveals, they are the party of his childhood friends. Greg's still budding and mentions that rumors are swirling about the Grievers recruiting a new member for the first time in years, which is why so many explorers have gathered. However, Greg dismisses the rumor as false, pointing out that no one is sitting at the founder's table. One of the other participants speaks up, asking where the Grievers are. He boldly declares that he only came to join them because they're considered the best. Full of himself, he brags that one day he'll be the strongest explorer ever, revealing he's already a level 4 certified explorer. Suddenly, a girl from the management staff steps forward and confronts the loudmouth. Without holding back, she tells him to get out. Some of the other staff members rush to calm her down, reminding her they're not supposed to stir up any trouble today. But the girl isn't having any of it, and she snaps back saying that her sister would have done the same thing if she were here. The tension builds as the two prepare to fight, and Cray, sensing the incoming chaos, tells Ruta they should get out before things get messy. Ruta follows him out just as the brat Gilbert tries to attack the girl Tino. But before he can land a blow, Tino quickly notices Cray's presence. She locks eyes with him, and just as Gilbert charges, she expertly dodges his attack and corners Cray instead. With Gilbert still flailing, Tino turns to Cray, calling him master, and asks what he's doing here. It's then revealed that Cray isn't just some random explorer, he's actually the leader of Grieving Souls and the clan master that everyone's been talking about. Cray begins to explain that everything started several years ago when he and his group left their village as fresh newcomers eager to explore. They quickly conquered several beginner treasure vaults, one after the other. But one day, while exploring a vault, a monster attacked Cray, but one of his friends killed it just in time. The friend praised Cray for acting as a decoy. Cray, however, knew the truth. He hadn't even noticed the monster was there. In that moment, he realized something critical. Though they all shared the same dream, their talents were far from equal. He recognized himself as just an ordinary guy in comparison and started to feel like a burden. He knew his friends were too kind to tell him to leave, so he decided on his own to quit the party. But when Cray tried to talk to them about it, they all dodged the topic, saying they still hadn't chosen a leader yet. Then the red-haired guy in their group suggested that Cray should be their leader, and the others immediately agreed, saying Cray was perfect for the role since he was good at giving speeches and motivating everyone, so Cray didn't even get the chance to refuse. Fast forward several years, and Cray is still the leader of the party, made up of his childhood friends. He admits that while he holds this role, he's long wanted to retire from being an explorer. Ruta then is still stunned and can't believe Cray is the clan master of First Steps, and even Ark joins in teasing Cray. Ark recalls how Cray had claimed he was late because he overslept, but now it seems like he was just secretly assessing the participants by blending in with them. Cray corrects him, saying that he really did oversleep, but Ark refuses to believe him. Cray then comments that much like Ark, most explorers just don't listen to people. Tino, visibly annoyed, says Ark is being downright rude and jokes that they should kick him out of the clan. Ark laughs, thinking Tino's sense of humor is hilarious. We also learn that Tino is a level 4 certified explorer, and Cray explains that she's a solo explorer in First Steps and also one of his childhood friends, as well as a disciple of Liz, one of their strongest members. Ark asks Cray if he's found any good candidates, and Cray, in his usual snarky way, wonders if Ark would actually take the person he recommends into his party. Ark, without hesitation, says he would because he trusts Cray's judgment, and the whole tavern is shocked to hear this. Ark's party mates try to warn him against it, but Ark stands firm, saying he'll only take in a single person suggested by Cray. Cray then asks if it can really be anyone, and Ark leaves it completely up to him. Cray thinks to himself that Ark really does have a big heart, though he notices one of Ark's party mates glaring at him for this. Cray then glances at Tino, and she immediately assumes he's going to choose her. She proudly declares that she's made up her mind to stay by Cray's side, now and always. She even adds that she has no interest in joining that wannabe handsome guy's party. Meanwhile, Gilbert starts causing a scene again, loudly announcing that he's going to be the one to join Ark's party. Cray recalls that Gilbert boasted about being level 4 and wonders if he's even in a party at all. Gilbert brushes it off, saying it shouldn't matter. Cray starts thinking that maybe this guy could be an asset if Ark trains him right. But Cray admittedly knows his eye for talent isn't great, so it might come down to luck. Cray then tells Gilbert he'll recommend him to Ark, but there's a catch. He asks Gilbert what he thinks is the most important thing for an explorer. When Gilbert can't answer, Cray tells him not to lose. He warns that if Gilbert lacks strength, he could put his entire party in danger. So Cray needs to see if Gilbert has what it takes. He casually mentions that ever since he became an explorer, he's never lost once. The crowd is shocked by this, though Cray thinks to himself that the only reason it's true is because he's never actually had a proper fight. Cray pulls off a ring from his finger and tells everyone that whoever manages to get their hands on this relic will be the one he recommends to Ark. He tosses the ring into the air. Gilbert catches it, but before he can celebrate, Tino sends him flying with a powerful kick. The ring rolls onto the ground, and suddenly the entire tavern erupts into chaos as everyone scrambles to grab it, so the place is turned upside down. Meanwhile, Cray casually slips out, leaving the participants to wreck the tavern over his little test. The next day, Vice Clan Master Eva Renfeed informs Cray that the tavern incident has made the news. She reveals that the venue was completely wrecked due to his reckless actions. Cray then immediately asks if there were any civilian casualties and is relieved to hear there were none. However, Eva adds that the Explorers Association wants to have a word with him. Cray wonders if Ark had anything to say about the chaos, and Eva tells him that Ark just laughed after reading the article. Cray shakes his head, thinking Ark's far too easygoing, and suggests they charge the repair bill to Ark's account and send him to the association as well. Eva sighs, telling Cray he relies on Ark way too much. This time, though, the association specifically asked for Cray. Realizing he can't get out of it, Cry grumbles, knowing he has to go or else the branch manager might come after him instead. He then complains about not wanting to leave without an escort and mentions that his disguise relic, a powerful artifact called Reversible Face, which allows him to change his appearance, has broken. Eva rolls her eyes, assuring him no one's going to attack him this early in the day, so with no other choice, Cry reluctantly heads out. Later, we see Cry groveling before the association manager, apologizing for the whole tavern disaster. He explains that no civilians were harmed and that once the chaos started, he couldn't stop it. He points out that the building was the only thing damaged and surprisingly, no one has filed a formal complaint. To sweeten the deal, he mentions that the tavern's owner is a friend of his and he's sure they'll forgive him. A young woman at the manager tells Cry to calm down, handing him a book. The association manager, Grack Welter, sternly reminds Cray that a high-ranking clan like First Steps should be setting a good example for others. Letting Cry off without consequences would send the wrong message. Cry, sensing where this is going, realizes he's about to get stuck with a chore. He explains that the Hunters Association receives all kinds of job requests, many of which are tough time consuming and pay so poorly that no one wants to take them on. Hunters call these unwanted tasks chores, and Cray is not a fan of the idea. Resigned to his fate, Cray flips through the list of available chores, most of which are meant for level 4 explorers or higher, but eventually he finds a level 3 task that seems a bit easier and snatches it up without thinking too hard about it, and we find out that he chose a rescue mission. Afterwards, we see Cry leaving the association and Grack watches him, thinking to himself that Cry hasn't changed a bit. He reveals that Cry, without realizing it, picked one of the most difficult-looking chores. Later, Cry discovers that Ark isn't at the guild headquarters, and Tino informs him that Ark has been summoned by some nobles. As Cry looks around and notices the place is empty, Tino approaches and shows him the ring he tossed the previous day, so Cray realizes she's the one who ended up with it. Tino proudly admits she didn't want anyone else getting their hands on his ring, and she nervously asks if she can keep it. And Cry tells her it's just a shooting ring, so she can have it. Then Cry casually asks if she's free right now. Tino, expecting a date, excitedly says she is, but her excitement vanishes when Cry hands her the chore he received from the association, so she horrifiedly bolts the second she sees it, but Cry calmly summons his magical chain Silver and orders it to bring her back. Moments later, Silver drives a reluctant and frustrated Tino back to Cry. She's visibly upset, accusing Cray of playing with her feelings. She thought he was asking her out, but instead he's saddling her with a crappy job. All she wanted was to get ice cream with him, not get stuck with an awful mission. She complains that the job is terrible and that as a level 4 explorer, there's no way she can rescue 5 people on her own. Cray agrees, nodding sympathetically, but Tino also adds that she already knows he's only sending her on this mission for her personal growth. Cry, scratching his head, starts wondering if the mission is really that tough since it's labeled as level 3. Realizing Tino just doesn't want to tackle the task alone, Cray decides to pair her up with 3 new recruits, Ruta, Gray, and Gilbert. Tino isn't thrilled with the arrangement, still hoping she'd be exploring alongside Cray instead, but despite her grumbling, Cray hopes the group will be able to handle the mission together. 6 years ago, when Cray's party first rolled into the capital, they were on their way to the association to officially sign up as hunters. But right when they reached the door, Cray started second-guessing everything. Luke told him to stop overthinking it, especially since Cray was the one who insisted they shoot for being the best in the capital. But Cray isn't doubting his friend's strength. He's worried because he knows he'll only drive them down. Luke told him to quit the nonsense and, without missing a beat, marched up to the doors, flinging them open with a loud declaration that he was the strongest swordsman in the world. Right after, Liz jumped in, shouting that she was the strongest thief in the world. With such a ridiculous, over-the-top entrance, there's no turning back. So Cray walks up to the reception desk to register the party, but deep down he's already hoping they'll regret making him the leader. So when asked to choose a name for the party, he picks the edgiest thing he can think of and calls them Grieving Soul, for absolutely no reason. The rest of the group hated it at first, thinking the name was dark and depressing. But the moment Cray tried to use his awful naming skills as an excuse to step down as leader, they all suddenly changed their minds, claiming they loved the name. Fast forward to the present, and Cray calls a meeting with everyone he's trying to dump his work onto. Greg, still in disbelief, can't wrap his head around the fact that Cray is actually the guild master of the Grievers. As crazy as it sounds, Cray confirms it, meaning he's also the infamous 1,000 Tricks that everyone's heard of. In the association, when a hunter hits a certain level of fame and achievement, they're given special titles, turning them into almost celebrity-like figures. Cray ended up with 1,000 Tricks as his title, but Gilbert refuses to believe any of it, since 1,000 Tricks is supposed to be the strongest person in the capital, and Cray looks like he's never even seen the inside of a training hall. Tino immediately jumps to Cray's defense, insisting that Gilbert is just too weak to understand Cray's power. Meanwhile, Cray's standing there, clueless as ever, wondering what power she's even talking about. He knows he only gets called the strongest because his friends constantly shower him with undeserved praise. But whatever, he asks if Gilbert and the others are going to take the job. Of course, Gilbert refuses because he's still not buying that Cry is the strongest in the city. Greg then tries to shut him up, nervous about what could happen if the actual strongest person in the capital loses his temper. But Gilbert, being the jerk he is, just shoves his fingers up Greg's nose. Since Gilbert clearly has no interest in cooperating, Cray shrugs it off and moves on to Greg. Greg's more than happy to accept Cray's request, so the only one left to ask is Ruta. Given that the quest is in a wolf den, Cry figures it's a perfect fit for her, since she was already planning to clear it. Ruta isn't exactly thrilled with the group she's stuck with, but she agrees to go along with it. Cray's pleased to hear that, so he tells Tino she can ask anyone else from the clan to help if she needs it. Tino, practically begging, pleads with Cry to join the team himself, but he shuts her down immediately. With Tino's party situation now sorted, Cray turns to leave, but of course, Gilbert can't just let things go. Upset that Cray's ignoring him, he challenges Cray to a duel. If he loses, he'll join the team. Cray, who absolutely hates getting dragged into duels, comes up with a quick fix. He agrees to the duel, but only if Tino fights in his place. Tino is more than happy with this arrangement, mainly because she's furious with Gilbert for daring to insult and doubt her master. She's also eager to show off her skills and give Cry a little demonstration of just how flexible she can be, throwing in some impressive camera angles for good measure. Gilbert might have gotten his face smashed in by Tino yesterday, but he's still running his mouth, claiming he was just caught off guard and that there's no way he'll lose to her again. And after he beats Tino, he says he's coming for Cry next. Cry, already irritated, has absolutely no desire to fight anyone today. But since Gilbert is so cocky, Cry casually points out that Tino is level 4 just like him. Tino chimes in, saying there's no way she could ever lose to someone like Gilbert, and to prove her point, she drops her weapons on the ground, daring him to fight. Ruta and Greg are getting nervous because sure, Tino's strong, but fighting without weapons seems like a terrible idea. Normally, Tino would win hands down because even though they're the same level, she earned all her experience doing solo missions and has tons of practice fighting other people, so she should win even unarmed. But Gilbert's got the Purgatorial Flame sword, which could tip the odds in his favor if he uses it right. Or at least it could have if he hadn't thrown his sword down too, deciding to fight barehanded. That was without question a dumb move, but Gilbert won't tolerate being looked down on, so he insists on fighting on equal terms. Now Tino's even more confident she'll win, so she casually mentions she'll grab some ice cream with Cry after she's done beating Gilbert up. Then as the fight begins, she charges at him, aiming for his face. Gilbert dodges the first blow, but can avoid the follow-up, a vicious kick to the face that sends him flying, just like last time. It looks like it's over, but to his credit, Gilbert gets back up and charges in again. Not that it helps, he gets caught in a chokehold almost immediately, but at least the guy's got some spirit. After some effort and training on his part, Gilbert finally manages to break free from Tino's hold. But unfortunately for him, the moment he does, she drops him to the ground with a clean chop to the back of his head, so he's definitely not getting up this time. As Tino celebrates her victory, she thanks Cry for helping her become so strong, even though Cry never actually did a thing to train her. Greg and Ruta are left absolutely floored by Tino's strength, while Gilbert just can't accept that someone might actually be stronger than him. Since the day he first picked up a sword, Gilbert always believed he was destined to be a hunter. His training allowed him to surpass professional swordsmen with ease, and when he finally reached the age to register as a hunter, he headed straight for the capital and formed a small party to start clearing vaults. Up until now, he had never known defeat. Even though Tino isn't fond of him, she still respects Gilbert's skill, so she encourages him to pick up his sword and keep fighting. But Gilbert's stubborn and his pride refuses, so Tino shakes her head, disappointed knowing that foolish pride like his is a one-way ticket to getting killed. As much as Gilbert hates to admit it, Tino's right. If this had been a real fight, he'd be dead several times over by now, so he's forced to confront the harsh reality that he's not as strong as he thought. Right then, Cry chimes in, casually guessing that Gilbert probably left his previous party due to a difference in strength. Gilbert is floored because Cry is spot on. Cry goes on to explain that he's dealt with similar issues in his own party, though he didn't quit, even if he might have wanted to. Gilbert totally misinterprets this, thinking it means Cry completely outclasses his teammates, and that Grieving Soul, the strongest party in the capital, is miles ahead of everyone. So this gives Gilbert a whole new understanding of what it really means to be the strongest. Cry then notices Gilbert's sword and gives it a light tap, just to see what it's capable of. At his command, flames immediately start pouring out of it, much larger than anything Gilbert has ever been able to summon. Gilbert is absolutely floored. He's owned the sword for ages, but has never managed to produce flames even close to this, let alone control them the way Cray just did, with a mere tap, and even without grabbing the handle. In this world, mana material is the lifeblood of everything. It's everywhere, just invisible to the naked eye. But inside treasure vaults, mana condenses into all sorts of physical forms, turning into everything from bizarre crystals to rare artifacts. The White Wolf's Den is one of these vaults known for spawning blood-soaked wolf phantoms. Naturally, Cry is more than relieved he sent the others down there and didn't have to deal with it himself. Eva, however, questions his decision. Was it really smart to send such inexperienced hunters into a place like the Wolf's Den? Cry waves it off, saying it's only a level 3 vault, and those 4 are pretty skilled for their level. Besides, he just has to thank Eva for the info on Gilbert, because watching Gilbert freak out when Cry randomly guessed a bunch of stuff about his past was pure gold. Eva's glad she could be of help, but she's more curious about how Cry handled Gilbert's relic like it was child's play, so she wants to know his secret. Cry shrugs, saying the relic was pretty straightforward. One of those he can control right off the bat. Even someone as green as Gilbert could use it with minimal training, so Cry doesn't see what's so impressive about it. But being the relic hoarder that he is, he's already debating whether to ask Gilbert to sell him the sword. Eva shuts that idea down immediately. Cray's already blown through a huge chunk of his budget on relic collecting. His collection is massive as it is, so why on earth would he need yet another one? Cray's eyes light up, insisting that each relic is one of a kind, and even though he's sitting on over 20 relic rings alone, there's always room for one more. Eva, realizing it's pointless to argue, just sighs. Sure, Cry has a solid income, but she can't let him blow it all on his obsession. See, the profits of Grieving Soul are split evenly among all members, regardless of what they actually contribute. So even though Cry barely lifts a finger, he still gets a fat paycheck every month. And there's no way he's giving up his relic addiction anytime soon. Then, when one of his relics needs recharging, he seizes the opportunity to dodge the conversation. He heads over to a member of the association and asks for a little help charging it up with magic, and they're more than happy to oblige since Cray's always doing so much for them. While Cray's relic is being charged, the guy helping him casually mentions a rogue phantom that popped up on the northern road and completely wrecked a caravan. There were 3 level 3 hunters guarding it, so this phantom has to be seriously strong. Now the Third Order Knights are recruiting for an extermination party. According to reports, the phantom was a wolf, and the location is near the White Wolf Den, meaning it likely came from there. There was probably a mass spawning of wolves, so the den is probably crawling with enemies at this very moment. Anyone unlucky enough to be down there is in for a world of hurt. Cry tries to brush off his concern, telling himself Tino's party is probably fine. But then the people around him start chatting about how the monsters in the White Wolf Den have been growing stronger lately, to the point where the association is considering bumping up its threat level. Worse still, a well-known level 5 Lancers party went missing inside that vault. So if even a level 5 team couldn't handle it, anyone below that level doesn't stand a chance. Now Cry is seriously worried and decides to double-check the quest he received earlier. Only now does he realize it wasn't just a random mission, it was a rescue job for Lancer Rudolph and his level 5 team. Cray should have actually read the quest details before sending Tino and the others into that death trap, but it's too late to call them back now. The people sitting with him notice something's off and ask if everything's okay. Cray admits that he sent Tino into the White Wolf Den. The two are horrified, realizing that Cray sent a level 4 down into a vault that even a level 5 party couldn't survive. They assumed Cry knew how dangerous it was and sent her as part of her training, because what kind of reckless teacher would send his student into a deadly mission without researching it first? Cry, feeling the pressure, suddenly stands up, muttering that he's got something urgent to take care of. Once Cry gets into the halls, he starts having a full-blown panic attack. He tries to calm himself, thinking Tina is pretty skilled. Maybe she can handle this. And Gilbert is almost as strong as her, at least when he's got his flame sword. But then it hits him. He drained all the power from that sword during his little demonstration. So if Gilbert didn't recharge it afterward, that sword's about as useful as a paperweight. Cut to Tino and the others as they make their way toward the White Wolf Den. Even before they reach it, they can feel a dangerous aura closing in. Tino, however, was expecting something like this. After all, it was Cray who sent her on this mission, and she had a gut feeling things might get dicey. That's why she even wrote a will, just in case she doesn't make it back. Still, she's confident she won't die. In her mind, Cray's got everything perfectly planned out. She believes he chose each member for the mission with careful deliberation, though Greg isn't buying it. He reminds her that Cray only met them yesterday. Gilbert agrees it seems unlikely, but at the same time, he wouldn't put it past Cray to have already done a full background check on all of them before they even met. In fact, the whole incident at the pub could have been part of his plan. So while this mission is way out of their league, Tino is convinced that Cray wouldn't send them on a suicide run. Unfortunately, that's exactly what Cray did, and he's absolutely freaking out about it. Realizing he sent them straight into a death trap, he decides to rescue them himself. Rushing into his hidden room, he starts grabbing every relic he can carry. Meanwhile, Tino and the others encounter a phantom who is wielding a sword and wearing armor, and they are surprised as they were expecting a wolf. Back to Cry, while he is leaving, Eva catches sight of him and of course assumes this was all part of Cray's grand test for Tino. She figures he planned it so Tino wouldn't actually be in any real danger, but thinks he must be slightly worried, so he's going to check on them. Shiga notices he's carrying Citri's Slime relic, which by the way is totally illegal under Imperial law. But Cry doesn't know what he's walking into, so he's taking every precaution. Cry heads out onto the balcony and straps on a wingsuit relic, aiming to get to the White Wolf den as fast as possible. As he takes off, Eva watches him go, quietly hoping he doesn't end up like the last guy who used that wingsuit, who died after crashing headfirst into a wall. The story shifts to the past again, showing it's been a week since Grieving Souls began their work in the capital of Zabrudia. Luke's standing there, staring at his broken wooden sword, completely dumbfounded. How could it have snapped just like that? But the others in his group aren't surprised at all, saying it's no shock since he was fighting phantoms. One of them mentions she never expected to face a Cyclops in a level 1 treasure vault. They all agree it was one tough phantom, guessing it was at least a level 4. Then some random hunter shows up, doubting their story, but the girls casually show him the Cyclops head they took as proof. He freaks out at the sight, while Cry just shakes his head, thinking this is exactly why he told them not to bring the head along. Next, the scene cuts to Tino and the gang having just taken down a wolf-like monster, but they're absolutely spent. Ruta points out that this creature doesn't seem like something you'd encounter in a level 3 vault, and everyone agrees it was way too much. Greg then turns to Gilbert, asking why he didn't use the flames from his sword. Gilbert says his sword's out of mana because Cry had used it earlier, and now he can't recharge it himself. Ruta suggests they should retreat. The situation's not what they were led to believe, and the people they were supposed to rescue might already be dead. But Tino, stubborn as ever, refuses to back down, arguing they haven't even entered the vault yet. Greg then pushes back, saying survival is more important than any mission, but Tino calmly explains he's got it wrong. They're not here to collect corpses. She's certain those people are still alive, and they're just following the plan of a level 8 hunter. She goes on to say that even the Purgatorial Sword running out of mana is probably part of Cray's big plan, teaching them not to lean so much on relics. They then get closer to the treasure vault and notice several crimson wolves inside, all equipped with armor and weapons. It hits them that the wolf they faced earlier wasn't just some random outlier. There's more. So Tino then explains that the White Wolf's den was built to accommodate the massive Silver Moon wolf monsters that originally lived here. She's convinced the wolves won't be able to move easily inside the vault due to their size and suggests they head in to engage them. But before she can act, Gilbert, being rash as ever, decides to charge at the monsters, thinking he can take them down if he just disarms them. Tino shakes her head, thinking he's an idiot, but Gilbert, of course, insists the Purgatorial Sword is stronger than any regular weapon, even without mana. Tino, however, tells him to stop acting recklessly because she's the leader and her job is to bring everyone back alive. She's certain her master is testing her leadership, and bringing her team home in one piece is the bare minimum to pass the test. Tino explains her plan. She and Ruta, being the fastest, will draw the wolves' attention, while the others will attack from behind. She points out that once they close the distance, the wolves' ranged weapons will be useless. She makes it clear there will be no sacrifices, and she won't let anyone be used as a shield. Meanwhile, Cry is flying towards them, his only concern being that Tino survives until he arrives. He doesn't care if she has to use her teammates as meat shields as long as she lives. Back at the vault, Tino and her team follow her plan, and after some hard work, they manage to defeat all the wolves. But Tino exhaustedly thinks this job is completely unreasonable. As they're catching their breath, more phantoms appear. Tino then takes a moment to reflect on her team. She admits that all in all, the party lineup isn't bad. Greg works well with everyone thanks to his experience. Gilbert might be a loudmouth, but he's strong, and Ruta doesn't stand out much, but her enemy detection skills are spot on. In fact, it's because of Ruta that Tino has been able to focus on fighting. Then as they take on the new wave of monsters, Tino thinks to herself that her master must have calculated every little detail, so he's like a god with how perfect his plan is. While fighting, Gilbert then starts thinking about his old party mates. He remembers how he pushed them too hard, frustrated that they couldn't keep up with him. He knew they were trying their best, but the gap between their abilities and his just kept growing wider. That's why he eventually left the party. Now that he finally gets it, he understands why they were so desperate. He realizes he never considered their feelings, and it hits him. He had no idea that fighting alongside a team as equals could feel this good. With that thought in mind, they defeat the monsters and make their way into a large room. Tino suddenly senses a presence ahead. She's convinced it's the boss, and it's a big one. Greg immediately cautiously suggests they run, but Tino unfazedly points out that they've come this far without a scratch, so why not take down the boss too? Greg remains hesitant, and Tino tells him that safe missions don't help people grow, but she admits that caution has its place, but sometimes they just need to go with the flow. Greg, after thinking it over, agrees she has a point. He then explains that once a hunter reaches level 4, they can make a living just by completing treasure vaults beneath their level. He admits that every time he thought a battle was unwinnable, he avoided it, and that instinct came from watching too many of his comrades die. Tino is sure Greg joined First Steps because he wanted to change that mindset, and she believes that's why her master placed him in this party. Greg isn't convinced, but Tino assures him that her master wouldn't have chosen someone he didn't believe in. She explains that her master's goal was to save all of them, and that he's like a god in how he operates. She's certain this group wasn't thrown together by chance. Everything was calculated by him. Ruta is still unsure and wonders aloud why he picked her of all people. Tino, after a brief pause, jokes that it might be because of her big melon. And without missing a beat, she continues ahead, leaving Ruta puzzled and blushing, asking what she even means by that. After that, we see Cry flying over the forest near the treasure vault, and of course he can't spot Tino anywhere. He grumbles that this relic is way too fast and wonders who the heck would make something without brakes. He enters the vault, crashing into the walls like a maniac as he flies inside. Meanwhile, Tino and the crew are facing the vault's boss, a massive white wolf. It lunges at them, but they manage to dodge, all thinking the same thing. This thing's way too strong. Tino then notices the boss isn't wearing a helmet, and she figures its head might be the weak spot. Determined to overcome this trial set by her master, she presses on. So Gilbert then steps up and blocks the monster's next attack, while Greg rushes in but gets launched backwards from the sheer power of the beast. Tino, quick on her feet, uses her agility to close the gap, dodging every swipe the wolf throws at her. Ruta observes Tino, and she is impressed because there's not a single shred of fear in Tino. The monster then turns its attention to Greg, and his sword snaps as he tries to block. The beast then moves in on Tino, but she takes the chance by climbing its weapon to deliver the final blow to take it down. But just as they catch their breath, they notice that the phantom manages to slash Tino's leg. Ruta rushes over asking if she's okay, but Tino waves her off saying she got a potion and quickly heals herself. Then we see that Greg looks distraught over his broken sword, but Gilbert bluntly tells him to be thankful he's still breathing. Greg agrees and sighs, saying they just got to find the missing people now, so Tino nods and hands him the sword of the boss they just defeated. Suddenly, they're ambushed by 4 monsters, all resembling the wolf they just fought. They can't believe 4 of them at once, so Tino feels the pressure, thinking this is way too much even for them, and she's left wondering what her master was thinking when he sent them into this mess. Greg, clearly anxious, asks what they should do next, so Tino quickly tells everyone to retreat into the narrow passage on the right because the monsters are too big to move well in there. But before they can make it, the monsters catch on and block their escape route, figuring out their plan. Gilbert and Greg then offer to act as bait, telling the girls to make a run for it, but Ruta hesitates, unsure if it's a good idea. But Greg insists it's better than all of them getting wiped out, and Tino, feeling stuck, wonders if this is seriously their best option. Lost in thought, she starts thinking about her master and suddenly remembers something. She then snaps back, telling everyone that no one's being sacrificed today, and she tells them to target the monster's eyes. Gilbert and the others rush to fight off the creatures just to give her the opening she needs. Tino recalls the training she did with the ring her master gave her, and with determination, she uses the same move to strike the monster's eyes, blinding one just long enough. Gilbert, seeing his shot, charges in, only to get hurled into the wall by the beast, getting wrecked in the process. Despite the pain, he mumbles an apology for jumping the gun, but Tino reassures him he did nothing wrong. As they're surrounded by 4 monstrous nightmares, it starts to sink in they might not make it out of this. Then out of nowhere, Cry crashes into one of the beasts, finally ending his wild ride, and Tino can't hide her relief at seeing him. Greg then quickly notices the creatures seem freaked out by Cray, but the monster that Cray crashed into, probably feeling brave, goes in for an attack, but one of Cray's rings protects him. The monster's shock is obvious when its attack fails miserably, and Cry, ever the showman, casually lies about having 17 lives. Then, without skipping a beat, he uses another ring to unleash a devastating blast, leaving everyone stunned by his insane power. Meanwhile, Cry, baffled by the strength of these creatures, wonders what the hell they are and questions if this is even still a level 3 vault. Despite his attack, the monster gets back up, leaving the others stunned. But Cray isn't surprised. He knows his shot rings are flashy but not particularly strong. Glancing at the weapons the monsters are carrying, he feels relieved that for once he brought 17 barrier rings with him. Still, he doesn't care about the rescue mission anymore. He just wants to go home, but unfortunately, the monsters aren't giving him that luxury. They prepare to attack, leaving him no choice but to use the necklace he's wearing. Cray drinks from the necklace, and then he tosses it into the air and shoots it with a shot ring, creating a cloud of smoke. And then he quickly tells everyone to run while they have cover. Then as they sprint away, the group can't help but feel that they're moving painfully slow. Ruta assumes Cry is keeping pace with Tino's injury in mind, but we soon learn the truth. This is as fast as Cry can run. As they escape, Tino reflects on her master's kindness, remembering the first time they met. Back then, she was being bullied by some rough-looking men, and it was the grieving souls who saved her. After asking their name, she'd been determined to join them ever since. Once they finally manage to escape from the monsters, the group expresses their gratitude to Cry for saving them. It's only then that Cry notices Tino's injury, and he apologizes for sending them on such a dangerous mission. Tino reassures him, saying it's no big deal, and Cry praises her for doing so well despite the circumstances, and his compliment makes her visibly happy. Cry then pulls out a relic and uses it to completely heal her leg, and Gilbert shockingly can't believe Cry is using a relic just for healing. Cry, in his usual blunt manner, thinks to himself that he uses relics for pretty much everything. Greg, still processing everything, asks if Cry defeated the monsters. Cry admits he didn't and explains that running was the best option at that moment, and he urges them not to dwell on it and tells them to follow him. As they do, Cry has a sinking realization. He has no idea where they are or where the exit is, leaving him silently wondering what on earth he's supposed to do now. The story then flashes back to 6 years ago, where Luke and the others first lay eyes on Cray's collection of relics. They're blown away by the sight of them, so Liz asks Cry to pick one out just for her. Cry then casually mentions that he did promise to do that, and Luke, not wanting to be left out, protests that's not fair and asks Cry to pick relics for him too. Soon enough, the whole group chimes in with the same request. Then one of the party members curiously points to a relic and asks about it. So Cry explains it's a magic bag, one that can store more items than it seems. The girl is impressed and realizes the bag must warp space, thinking it's a rare and valuable item. But Cry quickly deflates her excitement, revealing it can only store chocolates, and that quickly changes her enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Liz puts on a bracelet from the relics and admires how cute it looks. But in seconds, she stumbles and can't get up. Cry then explains it's actually a labyrinth ring, which completely messes with a person's spatial awareness. Liz, now frustrated, struggles on the ground as Cry continues, casually adding that most people who wear it end up tearing their bodies apart from the disorientation, and the fact that Liz is still in one piece pretty astounding. Next, Luke picks up a wicked-looking sword, clearly drawn to how cool it looks. Cry tries to warn him, telling him it's a cursed blade, but Luke's already too late. The moment he touches it, he goes into a full frenzy. His party scrambles to hold him down while Cray's collection of relics ends up causing absolute chaos. In the end, it's explained that these relics were later turned into training gear for Luke and Liz. The story then jumps back to the present, where Cry is quietly losing it. He knows Tino and Ruta are both thieves, so he really wishes they'd be out doing some recon or something useful. Instead, they seem to have complete faith in Cray's ability to navigate, even though he has no clue where he's going. Then Gilbert chimes in full of admiration, certain that the great Cray must have everything under control. But to him, it looks like they're wandering in circles. He finally asks Cray if they're heading toward the exit, but before Cry can even stammer out a response, Tino steps up confident as ever and points out that this path definitely doesn't lead to the exit. She has a rough idea of the den's layout from a map she saw, and while they're heading in the wrong direction, she assumes Cray must have some deeper plan. Ruta, of course, agrees but wishes Cray would at least tell them where they're going, but Cray is still silent. Eventually, they come across a fork in the road, and Cray, still winging it, randomly picks a path. To everyone's shock, he miraculously leads them straight to the injured hunters they were sent to rescue. Cray naturally has no idea how he managed this, but since the others are already moving to help, he plays along. Watching them tend to the injured, Cray is genuinely amazed that Tino noticed them, because he sure as hell didn't. The leader of the injured group, Rudolph, thanks Tino for saving them. But in typical Tino fashion, she gives all the credit to Cray, saying they never would have made it without him. Cray, feeling the pressure, tries to explain that he was just guessing the whole time and doesn't deserve any praise, but no one believes him for a second, and they just think he's being modest. Meanwhile, Ruta is busy handing out potions to help the hunters recover, but they're still losing energy fast because they haven't eaten in ages. That's when Cray remembers the one smart thing he did, bringing along his magic chocolate bag. With a near-infinite supply of chocolate inside, he figures it's the perfect solution for now. Rick then turns to Rudolph, saying he's glad Rudolph made it out alive because when he first heard that a level 5 party had gone missing in this dungeon, he feared the worst, but Rudolph grimly replies that they barely survived. Gilbert is skeptical and finds it hard to believe. Sure, the wolves were tough, but there's no way a level 5 party should be overwhelmed by monsters like that. But Rudolph wasn't talking about the wolves, rather the real threat was something far worse, a small phantom covered in bones that completely wiped out their party. Whatever that thing is, it's the pure embodiment of a grudge. It has full control over the vault, likely the curse of the silver moon that haunts this place. It embodies the resentment of every monster slain here, and over time his power grew until it became a true nightmare. Rudolph and his crew are no amateurs. They're some of the strongest around. Yet every single one of them was helpless against this beast. In fact, Rudolph would go so far as to compare the Phantom to Thousand Swords, a member of Grieving Souls and widely recognized as the most powerful swordsman in the capital. Thousand Swords is a prodigy who's mastered every orthodox technique only to invent more on top of them. This guy can take down enemies by the dozen, and he does it all with a wooden sword. Luke isn't someone to take lightly either, so Cray feels like it's a bit of an exaggeration to compare a Phantom to him. If something like that really existed, Luke would have hunted it down by now. Still, considering his Phantom completely wiped out a level 5 party, Cray isn't exactly confident that Tino and her group can handle it. In fact, he's seriously regretting not dumping this whole job on Ark instead, so he wouldn't have to deal with this mess. Rudolph continues explaining that the monster was toying with them during their last encounter. It didn't kill them immediately, but there's no doubt in his mind that if they run into it again, it won't be so merciful next time and it'll finish them off for good. Ruda then turns to Cry, asking what they should do next, but inside, Cry is internally losing it because he wasn't remotely prepared for this kind of situation. He stares off into space for a moment, panicking before finally coming up with something. He then tells Ruda they need to focus on getting the injured to safety and that escaping the vault is the priority. On top of that, since this was originally Tino's mission, he tells her that she's in charge from here on out. Tino flusteredly insists she doesn't deserve to lead when someone as legendary as Cry is around. But Cray's not interested in leading because he just doesn't want the responsibility. Eventually, Tino reluctantly agrees to take the lead and echoes Cray's plan to head for the exit, and thanks to Cry healing her leg, they should make good time, but Cry reminds her not to run too fast as the injured won't be able to keep up. He mostly says this for his own benefit, knowing full well he's way too out of shape to keep up with Tino's full speed. As they navigate the vault, Tino announces that they're getting close to the exit, and so far they've been lucky because they haven't run into the deadly Phantom. But just in case, Rudolph steps up and promises to act as everyone's shield if the Phantom shows up, buying time for the others to escape. Tino quickly reassures him that won't be necessary because she's confident everyone will make it out as long as Cry is with them. Cry, however, is not feeling the same level of confidence. In fact, he's already mentally preparing to grab Tino and ditch the rest if that Phantom appears. Still, for now he tries to stay optimistic, because he's got 5 safety rings left, so at the very least he can survive for a while if a fight breaks out. But that's about it because his shot rings don't work, and he lost the only sword relic he had while flying over here, so staying optimistic is a bit of a struggle right now. Just then, everyone feels something ominous approaching and they all snap into battle stance. Cry steps in front of Tino, determined to protect her. He's got no attack relics, but he's fully prepared to throw himself at whatever's coming, even if it means launching himself like a human missile with his wingsuit. The atmosphere shifts as the Phantom closes in, and everyone is paralyzed with fear because they can already tell they don't stand a chance against this thing. But Tino's terror intensifies when she spots something even more terrifying behind the Phantom, and an overwhelming sense of doom washes over her. So she starts begging Cray for help. Meanwhile, Cray recognizes the second figure, but is more confused than scared, having no idea why she would show up here. Suddenly, the second figure flash steps in and obliterates the Phantom with a single kick. After witnessing that level of power, there's no doubt in Cray's mind it's Liz. She casually walks up to Cray and, just to make sure, asks if it was okay that she kicked the Phantom into the wall, admitting she has no clue what's going on. But Cray, still stunned, tells her she has nothing to worry about. Liz then relieved and mentions that on her way over, she found one of Cray's sword relics lying on the ground. Ruda and Greg instantly recognize who Liz is, but Rudolph has never heard of her. Liz's eyes narrow because she can't believe there are hunters who don't know about Grieving Souls. She was already on edge, having sprinted home to see Cray, only to be told he had gone to this vault. Initially, she thought Cray was just being overly cautious, certain that Tino could handle this mission on her own. So if you can imagine her disappointment when she shows up and sees that Tino is failing miserably at managing what should have been a minor vault. Gilbert, trying to defend Tino, pipes up to say that she didn't do anything wrong, but Liz isn't having it, and without a second thought, she kicks him into the wall, leaving him nearly dead from the hit. With no more distractions, Liz turns her fury back on Tino, berating her for being such an incompetent weakling after all the training she's been through. Tino then starts begging for forgiveness, and Cray can barely watch because Liz is really tearing into her. As Liz continues yelling, the Phantom begins to recover from that brutal kick, and both Greg and Ruda are frantically pouring healing potions on Gilbert, trying to keep him alive after the hit he took. Not wanting Tino to end up in the same situation, Cray steps in attempting to calm Liz down. He reminds her that Tino doesn't deserve this anger because he sent her to rescue the hunters, and she actually did complete her mission, so calling her incompetent isn't fair, especially considering how well she handled everything. As soon as Liz hears Cry say this, her fury melts away as she turns to him and asks if Tino really did a good job. Cry reassures her, telling her that Tino truly impressed him. While he's at it, he also takes the opportunity to congratulate Liz for finally learning to hold back with her attacks. Liz, now beaming from the praise, admits that she still doesn't fully understand the point of going easy, but since Cry wouldn't stop nagging, she eventually learned to pull her punches. Cry is glad she listened, though he does point out that she might need a bit more practice. After all, Gilbert is in critical condition from her so-called warning shot. Tino apologizes again for the trouble she's caused, but Liz, now calm, reassures her. She tells Tino she's got real potential, but she'll have to work twice as hard to make up for her lack of raw strength. Meanwhile, the Phantom has regrouped with one of the wolf bosses and is preparing to attack again. The rest of the group braces for the worst, but Liz just looks annoyed. The monster has the audacity to pull out a machine gun, as if that's supposed to intimidate her. She casually picks up her mask, and as the wolf opens fire, Liz doesn't even flinch. The bullets move so slowly, they might as well be in slow motion. And by the time the gun runs out of ammo, Liz is still standing there, completely unharmed. Not only that, but she's casually holding some of the bullets in her hand. And she's even had the time to arrange the rest into a neat little pattern. Liz might have cooled down earlier, but finding out that Tino was struggling against a monster with a gun has her even more furious than before. Liz was dodging bullets by the time she was 10 years old, so having a monster-pointed gun at her is nothing short of an insult. She's about to show just how laughable that is. With a graceful backflip into the air, she comes down with a devastating kick, slicing straight through the giant wolf and splitting it in half, causing it to explode. For Liz, this wasn't hard at all, so she can't understand why Tino didn't just do the same thing ages ago. As Liz continues lecturing, the Phantom draws its sword and charges at her, but Liz unfazedly believes this should have been another easy win for Tino. So with nothing more than 2 fingers, she catches the Phantom's sword mid-strike, knees it into the air, and unleashes a barrage of punches, all while berating Tino for being too weak to handle something this pathetic on her own. Tino breaks down in tears and Cray feels bad for her, but honestly, this is par for the course with Liz's tough love training methods. After all, Liz is the fastest hunter in the world, and her blinding speed has earned her the nickname Stifled Shadow. Then once everything calms down, Tino, Greg, Ruta, and Gilbert regroup at the guild. Gilbert announces that he wants to give up his flame sword because he's realized he's been relying on it way too much, and now plans to train his body from scratch until he can catch bullets like Liz. The others don't believe for a second that he'll ever manage it, but if he's serious about wanting to be like Liz, Tino figures he should know something about the masks they all wear. Everyone assumes Cray planned it this way to sharpen his party's skills, but the truth is when Cray ordered the masks for Grieving Souls 6 years ago, he forgot to include eye holes. So yeah, everyone in the party has basically been fighting blind this entire time. Back in the present, we find Cray searching for Citri's slime, but it's nowhere to be found, so he frustratedly decides to just forget about it for now. Though that's easier said than done because his mind drifts back to a year ago when Citri Smart, an eccentric alchemist with a certification level of 2, left the slime in his care, convinced it would be safe with him. Citri is famous as the brains behind the Grievers and a member of the Empire's academic institution, is known for her brilliance and unconventional ways. In the past, she was even hailed as the most outstanding alchemist, with the moniker Unfettered. Cray reflects that her genius has often led him into sticky and dangerous situations just like this one, and he remembers naming the slime Citri's Slime. He then remembers how they used to mess around with slimes as kids, and one time when he tried to let the slime out for fun, Citri stopped him casually, warning that it was a little dangerous and could possibly destroy the entire capital. Cray understandably thought that was more than just a little dangerous, and then Citri asked him to be extremely careful with the slime, and he agreed. Fast forward to the present, and he's still trying to track down the slime, even though part of him would love to just forget it ever existed. With no luck finding it, he gets exhausted and sits on his bed, attempting to think through the situation calmly. He recalls opening the capsule in the White Wolf's den, only to find it empty. He's sure he kept the slime locked up safely, so how could it possibly have escaped? Maybe, just maybe, this is some elaborate prank by Citri, and he tries to laugh it off. But deep down, he knows he just doesn't want to deal with this nightmare anymore. Meanwhile, in the White Wolf's den, a group of adventurers is battling monsters that are way stronger than expected. One of the women remarks that this request is turning out to be tougher than they thought. Her companion agrees, but stresses the importance of investigating the treasure vault is crucial to the country. He recalls that Thousand Tricks is also involved, which only confirms their suspicion. Something big is definitely happening here. Meanwhile, at headquarters, we find Cray looking exhausted from lack of sleep. As he stumbles around, he runs into Eva, who informs him that they've been contacted by the association regarding the White Wolf's den. Cray, in his typical fashion, casually tells her to pass it on to Tino, since she was the leader of that mission. Eva, wanting to handle it herself but unable to, explains that Tino is busy training with Liz. Cry, clearly not in the mood, changes the subject, asking Eva if there's been any movement in the imperial capital. Eva, understandably confused, asks what kind of movement he means. Cry, shrugging it off, says it's probably nothing and that it's good if nothing's going on. Eva, now suspicious, says she'll look into it anyway, thinking Cry is hinting at something deeper. But Cry brushes it off, telling her it's just his imagination. He then decides to go check on Tino instead, and Eva informs him she's training on the second basement level. As Cry walks off, Eva remains convinced that Cray's comment wasn't as innocent as he made it seem. She knows he's had a freakish ability to predict natural disasters like earthquakes and treasure vault abnormalities, but she's unaware that Cray's predictions may have been because he caused some of those disasters himself. Cut to Cry arriving at the second basement level. A bunch of hunters are gathered outside the training room, clearly waiting for their turn. Among them is Sven Anger, a level 6 hunter, who immediately asks Cry to put an end to Liz's madness. Apparently, Liz has taken over the training grounds and no one else can use them. Cry jokingly replies that monster hunting isn't really his thing, but Sven desperately tells him that he's the only one who can stop her right now because Ansem and Lucia are out on a mission right now. Sven can't wrap his head around why Liz even came back on her own, to which Cry nonchalantly explains that she disarmed all the traps, made it to the boss room, got bored, and came back. Sven is floored, completely unable to believe Liz got bored in a level 8 treasure vault, muttering in disbelief about what kind of nerves the Grievers must have. But he quickly snaps back to the present, urgently warning Cray that if they don't stop Liz soon, Tino's going to die. But Cray, in his usual laid-back style, doesn't believe anything serious is going down, thinking humans don't just drop dead that easily. But the moment he swings the door open, he spots Tino flat on the floor, completely unresponsive. Liz standing over her, mocks her to get up, questioning if that's all she's got. When Tino still doesn't move, Liz decides to end it, but Cry steps in and stops her. She turns to him a bit annoyed and asks what the problem is because she's in the middle of training Tino, and she's baffled by how weak she is, claiming she herself was way stronger at that age. Cry knows Liz is fired up, but he gently tells her that Tino has reached her limit and it's time to call it a day, and Liz surprisingly agrees without a fuss. But then from behind, Tino grabs Liz's foot, gasping that she can still keep going, driven by her determination to keep fighting with Cry watching. And Liz amusedly comments that Cry is incredible for pushing Tino to get up like that, and with a smirk, she resumes the training session with Tino. Cry then leaves the room, apologizing to the hunters waiting outside, explaining that Liz isn't going to listen to reason when she's in that kind of mood. Sven then shrugs and says it can't be helped, remarking how tough Cray must be on Tino, seeing how hard he's pushing her. Cry tries to deny it, but Sven waves him off, uninterested in the explanation, so Cry lets it slide and sits down with Sven to talk. Sven then fills Cry in on the latest bad news. The Northern Road has been closed off due to the appearance of multiple phantoms, and the situation is still under investigation. And to make matters worse, the knights who went to check things out were killed. Cry remembers hearing about phantoms from the White Wolf's den attacking a traveler and thinks something's definitely off with that treasure vault, so he wonders if this is why Gark called for him. His thoughts then drift to Ark, wishing he were around to handle this mess because everything always seemed to go smoother with Ark in charge, so eventually Cray decides to buy some time until Ark returns. Noticing how calm Cry looks, Sven remarks on how relaxed he seems despite the chaos. Cry, internally shrugging, thinks it's only because this whole mess isn't really his problem. He then figures if he sends the obsidian cross over to Gark, then it's not on him, so he casually suggests to Sven and his party that they take on a quest for the association, since they can't use the training room anyway. And he also adds that while they're at it, they should let Gark know he's busy and can't answer the summons. Cray then takes off, and Sven's party member mutters that he has no clue what's going on in Cray's head. He figures Cray's just living the easy life, lounging around the clan while everyone else is out busting their backs exploring treasure vaults. Sven, clearly tired of the new guy's whining, explains that Cray's always been like this, and it's just how the clan operates. He adds that while it might not make sense to the newcomer now, Cray is a freaking monster beneath that carefree attitude. So Sven warns his clueless party mate to stop taking things at face value and pay closer attention to what Cry says, because there's always more going on under the surface, and the new guy finally gets the message. Meanwhile, Gark is trying to wrap his head around the fact that nothing's changed at the White Wolf's den or the surrounding areas, so he wonders what the hell went sideways in that treasure vault. He's pretty sure it's something man-made and figures he needs to talk to Cry about it. But before he can get ahead of himself, his assistant Kana reminds him that the obsidian cross had already sent Cray's busy and can't show up. Gark, not buying it, says he'll just have to go see Cry himself, convinced that Cray's got some intel. Kana then confusedly asks why Gark thinks so, and Gark points out that Cry hasn't been hitting up treasure vaults much lately, but for some reason, he made a special trip to this one, so that alone screams that something's off. Elsewhere in some shady facility, a group of researchers is in full panic mode. Their lead scientist can't believe a high-level hunter got involved. He knows it's only a matter of time before the association figures out what they're up to, but worse yet, they realize that Thousand Tricks is way more dangerous than they'd heard. Turns out, this sketchy group calls themselves the Magical Society of Akashic Tower, and they're the ones pulling the strings behind all the weird stuff going on lately. They complain that hunters are relentless, and they know the hunters won't back off until they uncover the cause of the abnormalities. The leader, trying to calm the crew, explains that their end game is to develop a way to create treasure vaults at will, and once their research pans out, they'll be able to generate endless treasure vaults. Then one of the underlings suggests they ditch the facility for now, baffled that their teammate Sophia is off on vacation while everything's falling apart. The leader, however, isn't fazed because he was the one who approved her time off, and he reassures them that she checked in with a communication stone saying she'll be back soon. And he's confident that the mess will be sorted once Sophia returns, so he orders the team to focus on gathering intel in the meantime. Later, we see Cry stuck in a nightmare about Citri's slime wrecking the capital, and he wakes up screaming like he's being chased by death itself. Relieved that it was just a nightmare, he glances over to find Liz lying next to him, having also woken up from his outburst. Apparently, she has a habit of sneaking into his bed, which explains why he was feeling so hot, because Liz's body is always hot for some reason. She then asks if Cry is free today, hoping to spend the day with him. Cry gets confused and wonders if she isn't supposed to be training Tino or herself, but Liz shrugs it off, saying she's taking a break. Cry agrees, easily distracted from the nightmare he just had. Later, Gark shows up at the Footprints headquarters looking for Cray, but sees that Cray and Liz are about to head out. As he tries to stop them, Liz snaps, telling him that Cray's busy today. Gark gets surprised and mentions how he specifically asked them to report to him anytime they clear a vault above level 7. But Liz isn't having any of it, telling him to shut up and accusing the group of relying too much on Cray, insisting they should learn to clean up their own damn mess. Her irritation peaks, and she kicks Gark in frustration for ruining her plans with Cry. As Gark and Liz start bickering like children, Cray takes the opportunity to slip away and talk privately with Kana. She updates him, saying there's no problem with the veins, and asks if he noticed anything odd at the White Wolf's den. Cry admits he didn't, but accidentally reveals he's more worried about something else. When Kana presses for details, he brushes her off, saying he can't tell her because someone might overhear. His mind races back to the slime, a secret he isn't ready to share. Instead, he advises her to ask Ark for help, thinking Ark might be the right person to handle this. Meanwhile, Liz and Gark are still at each other's throats, with Liz mocking Gark for getting old and weak, which pushes him over the edge, making him fight seriously. Cry then explains that Gark used to be a level 7 hunter in steps, and before those two idiots wrecked the whole damn building. He tells Gark he's already finished talking things over with Kana, but of course Gark's too stubborn to let it go. Just as he's about to lose it again, he realizes Liz has already slipped away and is standing beside Cray. Gark gets confused as hell and wonders when she managed that, and finally he calms down, but he grumbles that he probably needs to get his sorry ass back into shape and then leaves with Kana. Not long after, Eo walks in, devastated to find the building trashed. Later, Liz and Cray are on their date, and Liz, still stuck on the earlier fight, says Gark's getting weaker. Cray disagrees, telling her it's ridiculous to compare others to herself. She laughs it off, saying he wouldn't last 2 seconds in the level 8 treasure vault she just explored with his abilities. That hits Cray, and he remembers the phantoms that were insanely strong. He starts wondering how they stacked up against the boss of the White Wolf's den, but Liz casually says she can't even remember facing a boss in that vault. That's when it dawns on Cray. The boss wasn't even worth remembering to her. Cray's thoughts then drift to Citri and the others still inside that level 8 vault, and he really hopes they hurry back because he's going to need Citri to do something before that slime stirs up a whole heap of trouble. Liz then notices that he seems down, and out of nowhere he asks what she'd do if Debrudia was ever destroyed, but Liz, with her usual upbeat attitude, says she'd run away with him. But this time she wants them to go to a tropical country, since she's never seen the ocean, and Cray thinks she's almost annoyingly optimistic. Then out of the blue, Liz snatches up a guy who was watching them. Cray asks her to let him go, and as soon as she does, the man bolts. Liz then wonders if he let the guy escape on purpose, and she can't believe how good his acting is, but Cray's left completely clueless about what she's even talking about. Meanwhile, the man is holed up in his hideout, baffled by how Liz noticed him. He's also scratching his head over why Cray let him go and wonders just how much they already know. Elsewhere, a young woman approaches Noctis Cochlear, the leader of the shady researchers we saw earlier. She then introduces herself as Sophia Black and asks to become his disciple, saying she's deeply interested in his work. Impressed by her determination, Noctis agrees to take her under his wing. The story then shifts to a flashback where we see Gark fuming as the Obsidian Cross informs him that yet again Cray is too busy to meet. Gark mutters that he has a mountain of questions for Cray, but it's always the same lame excuse. He recalls that the Obsidian Cross arrived here with a mission and wonders if he can truly rely on them. They assure him he can. So Gark instructs them to investigate the White Wolf's den. In the present, we find the Obsidian Cross locked in battle with monsters in the White Wolf's den. While Sten reflects that, as usual, everything seems to be playing right into Cray's hands. The scene then shifts to Cry strolling through the slums with Liz, who's delighted to think they're on a date. Cry quickly clarifies that this is not a date and notes that they're in the most dangerous area of the Imperial Palace, where the locals are visibly rattled to see Liz there. Liz then curiously asks if Cray's looking for something, and Cray admits he is. According to Eva's intel, people have started vanishing in the area, and it's a creepy but not unheard of occurrence in a place like this. But if a Citri slime is involved, it's no joke. He also recalls a new ice cream shop recently opened in the area and decides to check it out while they're there. He then suggests they head to the shop, and Liz clings happily to his arm as they walk. Meanwhile, the man Liz had apprehended earlier spies on them from a nearby building, and he wonders why on earth they're here and if Cry somehow let him go on purpose to be tracked, but he's certain no one had followed him. He's confident that no one could guess their new ice cream shop is actually a research base and is baffled at how Thousand Tricks figured this out. He hurriedly decides to close up shop just as Sophia arrives. He's relieved to see her. When Cray and Liz reach the shop, they find it locked. Liz gets frustrated and tries to break down the door, but Cray stops her, suggesting they may just be closed for the day. Liz insists it was open moments ago because she can still smell the sweetness in the air. Inside, the man listens to their conversation, sweating nervously, but then feels a wave of relief when he realizes Cray and Liz are giving up and walking away. Back at the clan, Cray is feeling frustrated after coming up empty-handed despite all his investigating. He wonders where on earth Citri's slime could have vanished to and asks Liz when Citri is expected back from the Night Palace. Liz admits she doesn't know, but says she'd gladly help Cry herself. Cry, however, explains he needs someone with expertise in magical creatures, a subject Liz knows she can't help with. She adds that Citri might take a while since she hauled along a ton of equipment for this raid, and Cray, trying to be patient, reassures himself that Citri will return soon enough. Eva arrives then, reporting to Cry on the members she's selected to investigate the White Wolf's den. She explains that since Ark is unavailable, she's put together a different team. Cry lets her handle it, thinking that while this mission is escalating, it's not his problem since he won't be joining them. The scene then shifts to Akashic Tower headquarters, where the leader is informed that Thousand Tricks has discovered one of their hidden bases. The members of the society wonder if Cray's information network has outmatched their own, and the man from earlier is baffled as to why Cray would just leave their base alone after discovering it, and he can't wrap his head around what that guy is thinking. Another member then tries to reassure him, but they're all uncertain about Cray's intentions. The leader then asks Sophia for her opinion, and she suggests they confront the hunters head-on. Others argue that they stand no chance, but Sophia dismisses their doubts. She points out that while they may be an illegal society, that doesn't mean they have to roll over for anyone. She insists this is the perfect opportunity to test the defense system she designed, and adds that if they wipe out these hunters, there won't be anyone left to spread information about them. The leader agrees with her, so he hands the command over to Sophia and leaves her to handle the situation. The scene then shifts to Tino in the bath, marveling at her own skin because there's not a single scratch on her body, even after the hell training her master put her through. She realizes her master must have dunked her in a potion bath after beating her senseless, and she's just glad to still be breathing. Afterwards, Tino heads over to the clan building and is shocked to find a crowd of people gathered there. She then asks one of the members what's going on, and he explains that they're teaming up with the association to investigate the White Wolf's den, and she's surprised they're deploying this many people. The member then adds that Cray had initially wanted to send Ark, but since he's unavailable, all these folks are standing in as replacements. Still, he admits that only the Grievers can truly fill Ark's shoes. Tino then starts wondering what must have happened in that treasure vault since her last visit to trigger this kind of response, and then we see that even Cray looks stunned at the turnout. Ava steps in and tells Cray that this is the team they discussed yesterday, but Cray hesitates and feels uncertain about sending so many people to a former level 3 treasure vault. He figures they'd be fine with even half this number, but the hunters get spooked at the idea. They plead with him to reconsider, worried that the mission was originally meant for Ark. Cray shrugs, thinking the mission isn't all that tough, and he had only wanted Ark for peace of mind. Eva then tries to settle everyone down, saying that Cray may have something to say to them. Cray then declares that half the crew should be more than enough for what used to be a level 3 vault, Still, the hunters look uneasy, so he finally agrees to send the entire team. Just then, Liz bursts in, taunting the cowards and insisting that she and Tino can handle the mission alone. Cry isn't sure if he can leave Tino with her on their own because he knows how much Tino has already suffered under Liz's hard-handed training, so he insists the others can handle it and brushes Liz's offer aside. Eva then turns to Cry, asking him to lead the mission, but Cry grimaces, trying to pass off the leadership to Sven, but Eva reminds him that Sven's already inside the vault. Cry thinks fast, agreeing to command the mission but mentioning that he's busy and will join them later, so until then he names Sven as their acting leader. Eva accepts, and Cry, satisfied with his plan, decides he'll take his time joining, aiming to show up just as the mission wraps up. Meanwhile, Sven and his party battle their way through monsters in the White Wolf's den, taking down every creature they encounter. Sven notes that while the monsters are strong, nothing here seems especially out of the ordinary, but they decide to press forward anyway. Back at the clan, Liz stews over why she's been left behind, pestering Cry to let her go with the others, but Cray declines, claiming he has a different task lined up for her. Liz lights up at this, agreeing to stay put, while Cray smirks to himself because he only said that to keep her from charging off to the treasure vault on her own. One of the hunters then asks Cray if there's anything specific they should watch out for on this quest. Cry mentions a slime, and that catches the hunter off guard because slime shouldn't be in a high-level treasure vault. But Cray insists they keep an eye out anyway, cautioning that it may not be just any ordinary slime, and with that the hunters set off. The scene then shifts to the Akashic Tower members, who are in a full-on panic. They're floored by the massive scale of the hunter's assault, and the leader fumes, calling it a shameless attack. He grumbles that they're being blocked from seeking the truth and declares that they should crush these intruders, but one member mentions their opponent is none other than Thousand Tricks, and warns that if he brings in the entire Grieving Souls crew, it could spell trouble. Sophia, however, remains unfazed. She points out that while Grieving Souls is indeed one of the capital's top parties, she's already built a defense system that will counter their attacks. She notes that only 3 members of Grieving Souls are currently in the capital, and they are Cray, Liz, and Citri. The member from earlier, Flick, skeptically demands to know how she's so certain of this, and Sophia smugly responds that her information network is leagues better than his, which ticks him off. She then adds that they can easily handle Stifled Shadow by preparing against physical attacks, and notes that Thousand Tricks won't be able to operate at full strength without a party member to guide him. The leader suspects that Citri might be the real problem here, but Sophia reassures him that the defense system she's built around their stronghold is specifically designed to block an alchemist's magic techniques, making it impossible to breach. She then declares that Citri is her nemesis, and she's fully prepared to crush her once and for all. Sophia also explains that Citri has been poking around this research ever since she caught wind of the leader's thesis, and she firmly believes someone like Citri has no right to meddle in his work. Then, with fierce conviction, she asks for permission to use every resource they've developed to handle the oncoming threat, and the leader grants it without hesitation. He commands everyone to follow Sophia's orders as if they were his own, though Flick doesn't look thrilled by this decision. The scene then shifts to Sven and his crew, still in the thick of their investigation. Sven's party members start grumbling, questioning why they're even on this quest, so Sven reminds them that they had no choice. It was a direct order from Gark. Henrik mutters that it feels like they're just here to clean up Cray's mess, and Sven doesn't deny it, but he adds that someday, Henrik might finally understand just how extraordinary Cray really is. Just then, Sven gets a message over his communicator, and realizing the situation outside has shifted, so he tells Henrik to sound the whistle. Henrik does, and every party in the treasure vault begins to head outside at the signal. Once outside, a party member confronts the Obsidian Cross, demanding to know why they use the emergency signal when there's clearly nothing out of the ordinary. Sven calmly agrees but explains that Cray advised them to watch out for slimes, but the guy can't believe it, scoffing that Cray would issue such an order from his comfortable desk back in the capital. And after all, slimes are weak creatures, hardly worth a fuss, but Sven calmly replies that he sounded the whistle out of concern for everyone, adding that it won't hurt to wait for reinforcements before pressing on. The team still can't wrap their heads around the idea of slimes appearing in a high-level treasure vault. Sven then brings up an odd story, recalling how once Cray invited them to a flower viewing party, but insisted they all bring their weapons since it was outside the city. The rude guy rolls his eyes, wondering why Sven's rambling about a flower viewing trip now. Sven explains that the place they visited is now a treasure vault, and he asks if they've ever actually seen a vault appear because it's like hell bursting open right on Earth. The guy realizes Sven's talking about the infamous Prism Garden, as Sven adds that Thousand Tricks has a way of foreseeing these things. He points out that he paid a hefty price for the communication stone just to get the intel faster from Cray because any information from him is very valuable. Back at the clan building, Liz eagerly asks Cray when they're heading out, excited to fight in front of him since she didn't get to show her true power last time. Cray considers that he'd intended to join at the last possible moment but realizes now that timing it right might be tricky. Just then, Citri arrives and Liz is surprised to see her back so soon, but Citri retorts that she didn't want to hear it from someone who returned even earlier than she did. Citri adds that she hurried back thinking Cray might need her help and shares her unease, urging Cray to strike their enemies down now before they get stronger. Then she pulls him aside to talk privately. Meanwhile, Gark is seen gearing up to enter the White Wolf's den himself. Kana tries to stop him, reminding him he's retired, but he waves her off, saying he can't let Liz show him up. Kana just sighs, thinking that he may be an adult, but he's as childish as ever. And just then, Citri arrives to make a request of Gark. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to not miss the next part.